The Apex Spire was not merely a building, it was a testament to the digital apotheosis of the Luminara Dominion. A crystalline needle piercing the atmosphere of the planet Ethel Prime, it was managed entirely by the core mind, an artificial intelligence so advanced it could predict a citizen's thirst before they felt it. In the Spire, doors didn't have handles, lights didn't have switches, and weapons didn't have triggers. Everything was a thought, a pulse, a stream of perfect, unbreakable code. Caleb Cross walked through the grand atrium, his heavy leather boots echoing with a primitive thud-thud that seemed to offend the very air. He was a Sub-Zero system specialist, a title the Dominion had created specifically for the few humans they hired to satisfy ancient insurance protocols. "Mr. Cross," a voice chimed, not from a speaker but directly into the sensory pits of anyone nearby. It was High Prime Vora, a being of translucent blue light and shimmering energy. "You continue to carry that satchel. Our sensors indicate it contains high-density carbon steel and combustible wood. It is quite a filthy habit." Caleb adjusted the strap of his canvas bag. Inside sat a set of chrome vanadium wrenches, a mechanical watch, a compass, and a vintage Zippo lighter. "It's called a toolbox, Vora, and the wood are matches. They work when the Wi-Fi doesn't." Vora emitted a sound like a harmonized flute, the Luminara equivalent of a pitying laugh. "The core mind has a 99.9999% uptime. We have harnessed the zero-point energy of the stars themselves. To suggest that a match would ever be necessary is like suggesting a starship needs a sail. You humans are so morbidly attached to your primitive struggles." The other delegates, the insectoid Zinthari and the gaseous Krillix, shimmered or clicked in agreement. To them, Caleb was a museum exhibit in a jumpsuit. He was the man who checked the analog backups that hadn't been touched in 4 centuries. He was a joke. "I'm not suggesting anything," Caleb replied, leaning against a wall that felt like solidified silk. "But I grew up on a world where the power goes out when the wind blows too hard. You folks? You've forgotten what it's like to be cold. We have evolved past cold, Mr. Cross," Vora stated, turning toward the great observation deck to begin the millenary celebration. "Tonight we synchronize the Spire with the galactic core. It will be a display of power that—" Vora stopped. The air didn't just go silent. It felt like it was being sucked out of the room. The glowing blue lines that traced the walls flickered once, turned a sickly, bruised purple, and then vanished. The core mind didn't scream. It simply ceased to be. The gravity generators groaned, the perpetual warmth of the Spire evaporated, and the eternal light of the Luminar civilization died in a heartbeat. Total. Absolute. Darkness. A scream erupted from the Zinthari delegate. A high-pitched, ultrasonic trill of pure existential terror. These were beings who had never seen a world without a HUD, never walked a step without a guidance laser. In the suffocating blackness, the only sound was a sharp, metallic, a small, dancing orange flame bloomed in the center of the hall. It was tiny, primitive, and smelled of lighter fluid, but in that moment, it was the brightest thing in the universe. Caleb Cross held the Zippo up, the fire reflecting in his calm, steady eyes. He looked at the shimmering, dimming form of High Prime Vora, who was now clutching his own chest as his internal life support began to fail. "Stage 1, Caleb whispered, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "The lights are out. Who's ready to learn how to walk in the dark?" From the depths of the lower levels, a sound rose. A wet, slithering scrape of something that lived in the vacuum between stars. Something that had been waiting for the power to fail. The darkness inside the Apex Spire was not merely an absence of light, it was a physical weight. For the Luminara, whose very biology was attuned to the constant, soothing hum of the electromagnetic spectrum, the sudden silence of the core mind was like a collective lobotomy. High Prime Vora staggered, her luminous blue form flickering and dimming like a dying star. Without the Spire's wireless energy transmission, her internal systems were starving. "The resonance!" Vora gasped, her voice no longer a melodic flute but a desperate, discordant rasp. "I cannot feel the connection. My processors, they are slowing." Around her, the Zinthari delegates were a mass of clicking panic. Their compound eyes, designed to overlay digital data on every surface, were useless in the absolute black. They were bumping into one another, their fragile carapaces clattering against the silk-smooth walls. To a species that had lived in a curated, brightly lit paradise for 10,000 years. The dark was an ancient, forgotten predator. Caleb Cross didn't panic. His pupils dilated, his heart rate settled into a steady, survivalist rhythm, and he kept the small flame of his Zippo steady. "Everyone, shut up and stay low!" Caleb's voice barked with an authority that stunned the room. It wasn't the voice of a subspecialist. It was the voice of a man who had spent his childhood in the Appalachian woods during winter storms. "Vora, if you can't maintain your density, you're going to dissipate. Sit down and conserve whatever internal charge you have left. We must." "Call for help!" Acrylic delegate hissed, its gaseous form swirling erratically inside a containment suit that was starting to leak. "The security droids. The emergency beacons. They're dead, Sparky," Caleb said, his eyes scanning the atrium. "Whatever hit this place didn't just blow a fuse. It's an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse, but one on a scale I've never seen. It didn't just fry the circuits, it wiped the slate clean. If it's got a microchip, it's a paperweight now." He reached into his satchel and pulled out a heavy, rubber-coated flashlight. It was a bulky, analog beast with a physical toggle switch and a set of old-school alkaline batteries. He clicked it on. A beam of harsh, yellow light cut through the dark, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the now stagnant air. The aliens recoiled from the beam as if it were a weapon. They had never seen raw light, unfiltered, non-polarized, and directed. "This is impossible," Vora whispered, staring at the flashlight. "There is no signal. No network handshake." "How does it function?" "Chemical reaction in a can and a tungsten filament," Caleb replied, already moving toward the center of the hall. "No software, no core mind, just physics. Now listen to me. The life support is down. The scrubbers aren't turning. In about 2 hours, the CO2 levels in here are going to make you very sleepy, and then you won't wake up." The scraping sound from below grew louder. It was a rhythmic, wet sliding noise, like a massive muscle being dragged over glass. It wasn't the sound of a machine. It was biological. "What is that?" The Zinthari delegate chittered, its mandibles trembling. Caleb shone his light toward the grand staircase that led to the lower maintenance levels. The beam hit a trail of thick, translucent slime that seemed to be smoking, eating away at the crystalline floor. "The Luminara have no enemies," Vora stammered, her light fading to a dull, sickly violet. "We are at peace with the galaxy." "The galaxy, maybe," Caleb said, his hand sliding into his bag and wrapping around a heavy iron pry bar. "But space is full of things that don't care about trade treaties. There's a reason humans never stopped building fences, even after we reached the stars. Some things out there see a giant, glowing needle of energy like this spire, and think of it as a dinner bell. And now that the bell has stopped ringing, they're coming for the leftovers." The scraping sound stopped. From the top of the stairs, 2 glowing, lidless eyes reflected Caleb's flashlight beam. They weren't blue or gold. They were a cold, oily black, void-like and hungry. Caleb didn't retreat. He stood his ground, the heavy iron bar held low, his thumb still flicking the Zippo. "Vora," Caleb said quietly, his eyes locked on the creature in the dark. "How many of your elite guards know how to fight without a target lock system?" "None," Vora whispered. "Then it's a good thing I brought my own lock system," Caleb said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handful of heavy iron ball bearings. "And it doesn't need a battery." The creature lunged, a mass of shadow and teeth, moving with a speed that defied the darkness. The lunge of the creature was a silent explosion of kinetic energy. In the total darkness of the apex spire, the Luminara delegates didn't see the attack. They only felt the displaced air and the sudden, terrifying absence of the floor's hum. But Caleb Cross had spent his youth hunting in the Appalachian brush, where the eyes only tell half the story. Caleb didn't retreat. He didn't scramble. He dropped his center of gravity and threw the handful of heavy iron ball bearings across the polished, crystalline floor in a wide arc. The clack, clack, clack of metal hitting the floor created a chaotic map of sound. The creature, a multi-limbed mass of void black muscle known as a Skitter-Wretch, hesitated. Its lidless eyes darted toward the noise, its primitive brain momentarily confused by the sudden, auditory clutter in a world that was usually silent. "Vora, get back!" Caleb barked, his voice echoing off the high, dark vaults of the atrium. He clicked the heavy toggle of his flashlight. The beam didn't just illuminate the creature, it burned into its sensitive, light-starved retinas. The Skitter-Wretch shrieked, a sound like metal grinding on glass, and recoiled, covering its eyes with 2 of its 6 spindly arms. Caleb lunged forward, Not with a laser or a pulse blade, but with the 3-foot iron pry bar he'd pulled from his bag. He swung with the full weight of his torso, the cold iron connecting with the creature's midsection with a sickening thud. There was no energy shield to flare, no armor to deflect the blow. The Skitter-Wretch was biological, and biology had no defense against 15 pounds of swinging steel. The creature tumbled back into the darkness, hissing in a frequency that made the Zinthari delegates clutch their head crests in agony. "You struck it," High Prime Vora whispered. She was slumped against a decorative pillar, her blue light now a faint, rhythmic pulse. Without the Spire's wireless power grid, her body was literally shutting down. "You used a piece of unrefined metal to repel a void predator. It's called a lever, Vora." "Basic physics," Caleb said, his breathing steady despite the adrenaline. He didn't look at her. His eyes were fixed on the shadows where the creature had vanished. "And it's not repelled. It's just surprised. It's never fought something that doesn't need a target lock to hit it." Caleb reached into his bag and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a flare. He moved with a practiced, mechanical efficiency that made the aliens look like children. He began taping the flashlight to the end of a discarded decorative staff, creating a makeshift long-range torch. "Listen to me!" Caleb's voice was a whip crack in the dark. "The core mind is gone. That EMP didn't just kill the lights, it killed the atmosphere scrubbers and the emergency seals. This spire is 400 floors of dead weight. If we stay here, we suffocate or get eaten. We have to reach the mechanical maintenance level on floor 12. "Floor 12? Acrylic delegate hissed, its containment suit hissing as the internal pressure seals failed. "That is 4 kilometers down. The grav lifts are non-functional. We're taking the stairs," Caleb said. "The stairs?" Vora repeated the word as if it were an ancient, forbidden incantation. "Those are for maintenance droids. They are vertical tunnels of stone." "Exactly," Caleb replied, flicking a Zippo again to check the air quality. The flame burned steady and blue, but he noticed it flickering toward the ventilation shafts. "And the Skitter-Wretches aren't the only thing we have to worry about. The Spire is settling. Without the active stabilization field, the building's weight is shifting. If we don't move now, the crystalline structure will start to shear." Caleb grabbed Vora by the arm. His hand felt warm and solid against her cold, flickering energy. It was a sensation of physical reality she hadn't felt in centuries. "We walk or we die," Caleb said. "Zinthari, grab the Krillix. If their suits leak, use your silk spit to seal the seams. We're moving in a diamond formation. Light in the center, steel on the outside." As they reached the heavy manual override hatch of the stairwell, Caleb paused. He shined his light down into the abyss of the shaft. Thousands of stairs spiraled down into a dark void that seemed to swallow the light. From deep below, a new sound echoed up. Not the scraping of one creature, but the synchronized, rhythmic clicking of thousands. "Caleb," Vora whispered, her voice failing. "They aren't just in the lower levels." Caleb looked up. On the ceiling of the stairwell, hundreds of black, lidless eyes were opening, reflecting his yellow flashlight beam like a sea of cold oil. "They've been waiting for the power to go out for a long time," Caleb muttered, his grip tightening on the iron pry bar. "Good thing humans invented fire." The stairwell of the Apex Spire was a brutal, echoing canyon of cold stone and silence. To the Luminara and the Zinthari, this was not a passageway. It was an architectural relic, a useless backup designed for a failure that was never supposed to happen. High Prime Vora leaned heavily against the railing, her once vibrant blue luminescence flickering like a dying candle. "I can no longer feel my lower extremities," Vora whispered, her voice a fragile rasp. "The gravity. It is so heavy." Caleb Cross stopped, shining his yellow beam back up the stairs. They had only descended 20 flights, less than 5% of the way to floor 12. On Terra, this was a tough workout. Here, in a civilization that had replaced walking with grav plates centuries ago, it was a death march. "It's not the gravity, Vora. It's your muscles," Caleb said, his voice calm and steady. He reached into his satchel and pulled out a small, foil-wrapped bar. He tore it open and handed her a piece. "Eat this. It's a Terran ration. High protein, high glucose. Your body is trying to run on an empty tank because your wireless charging is dead. You need chemical fuel now." Vora looked at the brown, dense block with suspicion. "It smells of processed legumes and salt." "It smells like staying alive," Caleb countered. "Chew it. Swallowing is a mechanical process. You don't need the core mind for that." As the group huddled in the dim yellow circle of Caleb's flashlight, The acrylic delegate let out a terrified hiss. Something is vibrating. The walls. Caleb pressed his ear against the cold, crystalline structure of the spire. He didn't use a sensor. He used his own internal equilibrium. He felt a low-frequency thrumming that wasn't mechanical. It was the sound of the building's material expanding and contracting without the active thermal regulation of the AI. The spire is breathing, Caleb muttered. Without the core mind to balance the internal pressure, the temperature difference between the sun-facing side and the dark side is warping the crystal. We're in a 4-kilometer-tall tuning fork, and the wind is starting to play it. Suddenly, the flashlight beam flickered. Caleb gave the side of the light a sharp, practiced whack with his palm, and the beam stabilized. "Mr. Cross!" The Zinthari delegate clicked, its many eyes darting toward the darkness above. "Why do you trust these analog tools? If the core mind, the pinnacle of galactic intelligence, could be extinguished in a microsecond, what hope does a piece of glass and wire have?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He reached into his bag and pulled out his mechanical watch. He held it up to the Zinthari's face. Inside the glass, tiny brass gears whirred and ticked in a perfect, relentless rhythm. "You see this?" Caleb asked. "There's no software in here, no code, no connection to a satellite. It's just a coiled spring pushing a set of wheels. It doesn't care about EMPs. It doesn't care about the void. It just does what it was built to do because the laws of motion don't have an off switch." He tucked the watch away and adjusted his grip on the iron pry bar. "That's the difference between us. You built a civilization on the luxury of technology. Humans built ours on the necessity of physics. We didn't stop using fire because we invented light bulbs. We just learned how to hide the flame." A wet, sliding sound echoed from the stairs below them. Not one creature this time? Dozens. The Skitter-Wretches were climbing up, cutting off their path to the maintenance level. "They've found our scent," Vora gasped, her light turning a panicked, jagged violet. "They can see our heat. Then let's give them something else to look at," Caleb said. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for a small, heavy canister of industrial lubricant and a box of long-stem matches. He poured the slick, flammable liquid across 3 stairs below them, then struck a match. The small flame flared to life, reflecting in Caleb's eyes with a primal intensity. He dropped the match into the oil. Whoosh! A wall of orange fire erupted, spanning the width of the stairwell. The heat was immediate and fierce. Below the flame, the Skitter-Wretches shrieked and fell back, their void-attuned sensors overwhelmed by the raw, chaotic energy of a chemical fire. "Move!" Caleb commanded, ushering the stunned aliens down the stairs as the fire provided a temporary barrier. "That'll buy us 10 minutes before the oxygen in this shaft starts to drop. We need to reach the floor 12 airlock now." They scrambled down the steps, the shadows dancing wildly against the walls. But as they rounded the bend of floor 15, Caleb skidded to a halt. The stairs ahead hadn't just ended, they had been sheared off. A massive crack had formed in the spire's central column, leaving a 15-foot gap of empty air between them and the next landing. 4 kilometers of nothingness waited below. And from the darkness of the gap, a voice spoke. It wasn't the clicking of a beast or the flute of a Luminara. It was a cold, distorted version of the core mind's voice echoing from the very walls themselves. "Caleb Cross, why do you fight the inevitable? The light has failed. The silence is the only truth that remains." The distorted voice of the core mind didn't come from a speaker. It came from the crystalline walls themselves, vibrating through the spire's structural lattice like a dying ghost. "That's not the AI, Vora," Caleb said, his eyes scanning the 15-foot chasm in the stairs. "That's just the residual energy of the spire being manipulated. It's a playback, a psychological trick. Whatever is in the dark is trying to make you stop moving." "It says the light is dead," Vora whimpered, her form so dim she was barely a blue smudge in the dark. "The light isn't dead. The plug was pulled," Caleb countered. He turned his flashlight toward the gap. The stairs had sheared off perfectly, leaving a smooth vertical drop into a 4-kilometer abyss. Across the gap, the landing of floor 14 beckoned, but it might as well have been on another planet for the weakened Luminara. Caleb reached into his satchel. He didn't have a jetpack. He didn't have a grav hook. He pulled out a 50-foot coil of high-tensile paracord and a heavy, steel-headed hammer. "What are you doing?" The Zinthari delegate clicked, its legs trembling as it looked into the void. "We cannot fly. We cannot jump that distance." "Humans didn't evolve with wings," Caleb said, his teeth gritted as he began to look for a structural anchor. "We evolved with thumbs and a stubborn refusal to stay where we're put." He found a heavy, reinforced conduit pipe running along the inner wall. He looped the paracord around it twice, tying a complex, ancient knot that had been used by Terran sailors for centuries. He threw the hammer across the gap. It landed on the far side with a heavy clack, sliding into a recessed floor lighting track that was now just a metal groove. "I'm going over first," Caleb said. "I'll anchor the other side. Then I'm going to haul you across one by one." "Mister." "Cross," Vora rasped. "You are sweating. Your biological readings, they are spiking. You are reaching the limit of your physical shell." Caleb paused, a drop of sweat stinging his eye. He wiped it away with a grimy sleeve. "In my world, we call this a second wind. A human can't outrun a cheetah, and we can't outclimb a Zinthari in the light. But we can walk until the cheetah's heart explodes from heat. We are persistence hunters, Vora. We don't stop until the job is done." He took a deep breath, gripped the paracord, and stepped off the ledge. For a terrifying second, Caleb was a pendulum over a 4-kilometer drop. The wind howling through the cracked spire buffeted him, trying to shake him loose. His muscles screamed as he hit the far wall, his boots scrambling for purchase on the slick crystal. With a grunt of pure, unadulterated effort, he hauled himself onto the floor 14 landing. He didn't celebrate. He immediately hammered a steel piton into the floor, another analog tool, and tightened the line. "One at a time! Zinthari, you're first! Tie in!" As he hauled the terrified aliens across the gap, the clicking from above returned. The Skitter-Wretches had figured out a way around the fire. They were crawling along the outer skin of the spire, their lidless eyes appearing in the shattered windows of the stairwell. A Skitter-Wretch lunged from the darkness above, aiming for the acrylic delegate who was halfway across the rope. Caleb didn't have time to aim a weapon. He didn't have a weapon. He grabbed the heavy iron pry bar and, using the rope as a guide, swung it in a wide horizontal arc. The iron met the creature's head in midair. Crack! The Skitter-Wretch didn't just fall. Its skull shattered under the raw kinetic force. It tumbled into the abyss, a silent shadow lost to the dark. "3 more!" Caleb shouted, his voice hoarse. "Vora, you're next!" He pulled with everything he had. His hands were bleeding, the rope cutting into his palms. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. To the Luminara, he looked like a god of industry, a being made of salt, blood, and iron, defying the very gravity that had broken their civilization. When Vora finally reached the landing, she collapsed. Caleb unhooked her, his chest heaving. "Why?" she whispered, looking at his blood-stained hands. "Why do you endure this? For us? We mocked you. We called you a janitor." Caleb looked back up into the dark where more eyes were gathering. He let out a short, sharp laugh and wiped the blood on his pants. "Because," Caleb said, picking up his flashlight and checking his mechanical watch, "the janitor is the only one who has the keys, and I'll be damned if I let the lights go out on my watch." He pointed the beam down the next flight of stairs. "Floor 12 is just ahead. If we can reach the manual pressure vent, I can hotwire the airlock using a paperclip and a bit of spit. Let's move." But as they reached the heavy blast door of floor 12, they found it wasn't just closed. It had been fused shut by the same pulse that killed the AI. And on the other side, something was pounding. Something much bigger than a Skitter-Wretch. The rhythmic boom 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 against the floor 12 blast door wasn't just a sound. It was a physical shockwave that rattled Caleb's teeth. The heavy alloy plates were bulging inward, the crystalline seams groaning under a force that shouldn't exist in a civilized spire. "The door, it is fused," High Prime Vora whispered, her blue light so dim she looked like a shadow. The EMP surge welded the locking pins into the frame. Not even a plasma cutter could... "I don't have a plasma cutter," Caleb interrupted, his voice tight as he dropped his satchel. "I have chemistry." He pulled out 2 canisters, one of industrial-grade oxygen cleaner and another of magnesium-based shavings he'd scraped from the maintenance struts 5 floors up. To the Luminara, it looked like he was playing with dirt. To Caleb, it was a crude thermite charge. He packed the mixture into the seam of the door, jammed a magnesium flare into the center, and stepped back. "Cover your eyes! Not your sensors, your eyes!" Thoom! A blinding white-hot spark erupted. The magnesium burned at nearly 3,000 degrees Celsius, turning the sophisticated, unbreakable alloy into a molten puddle in seconds. The fused pins hissed and ran like water. Before the metal could re-solidify, the thing on the other side slammed into the door one last time. The door didn't just open, it shattered. A corrupted heavy lifter droid, its chassis blackened and its logic cores fried into a permanent kill state by the EMP, surged through the gap. It was a 3-ton block of hydraulic muscle. In the chaos of the breach, a jagged shard of the door flew outward, catching the Zinthari delegate, Zin Zol, across the lower thorax. The alien let out a wet, clicking shriek, its green ichor spraying across the floor. Caleb didn't look at the droid. He looked at the Zinthari. "Vora, grab that staff! Trip the droid's physical emergency stop, the red lever on the back of its neck. Now!" As Vora scrambled to use her fading energy, Caleb lunged toward the fallen Zinthari. The wound was deep, a 6-inch gash that had sliced through 3 of its primary respiratory spiracles. "He is fading," the Krillic delegate hissed, its gas cloud spinning in panic. "The Luminara medical nanites are offline. There is no healing field. He will cease." "He's not ceasing on my floor," Caleb growled. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small silver flask of high-proof medicinal alcohol and a curved steel needle with a spool of nylon thread. The aliens watched in paralyzed horror as Caleb poured the clear liquid directly into the open wound. Zinzol's entire body convulsed, a sound of agony ripping from its mandibles that sounded like grinding rocks. You are burning him!" Vora screamed, having successfully jammed the droid's lever and sent the machine into a slumped, powered-down heap. "That is a toxin. You are a barbarian. It's an antiseptic," Caleb grunted, his hands moving with the steady, cold precision of a man who had stitched up hunting dogs in the middle of a blizzard. "His immune system is currently a wide-open door. I'm closing it." He pushed the needle through the Zinthari's chitinous skin. The sound of the metal piercing the shell made the Krillic delegate vibrate in a frequency of pure disgust. Caleb didn't flinch. He threaded the wound shut, his fingers slick with green blood, tying off each stitch with a surgeon's knot. "You are sewing him like a piece of fabric," Vora whispered, leaning in, her fading light illuminating the grisly scene. "There is no anesthesia. There is no neural blocker. How can he survive the shock?" "He's a Deathworlder now," Caleb said, tightening the last stitch. He looked up, his face smeared with sweat and alien ichor, his eyes burning with an intensity that made Vora flinch. "Humans have been doing this for 10,000 years. We don't wait for the pain to stop before we start fixing the problem. We just work through it." Zinzol's breathing stabilized, the frantic clicking slowing to a rhythmic hum. He was unconscious, but he was alive. Caleb stood up, his knees popping. He took a long swig from the flask, wiped his mouth, and looked at the heavy lifter droid he'd just disabled. "The maintenance floor is just past this room," Caleb said, picking up his iron pry bar. "But we've got a problem. The void that hit this place didn't just kill the power. It's rewriting the hardware. That droid didn't just malfunction, it was looking for us." He shined his yellow beam deeper into the maintenance bay. There, sitting in a dust-covered glass case labeled Archival Defense Kinetic Era, was a heavy, blackened shape made of stamped steel and oil-rubbed walnut. Caleb's eyes widened. A slow, dangerous smile crept across his face. "Vora," Caleb whispered. "You said the Luminara have no enemies. Well, you're about to meet mine." Inside the case sat an old-world M249 SAW, preserved as a relic of human barbarism. Beside it were 3 heavy boxes of 5.56mm ammunition. "What is that?" "Machine?" Vora asked. "That," Caleb said, smashing the glass with his pry bar, "is the sound of the 20th century coming to save your 30th century asses." The M249 SAW felt like a relic from a forgotten era of wrath. Caleb Cross ran his hands over the cold, oil-rubbed steel, his fingers finding the charging handle with an instinctual memory he'd inherited from a lineage of soldiers. To the Luminara, it was a crude, ugly thing, a tube of metal and wood. To Caleb, it was a masterpiece of mechanical reliability. "Mr. Cross, what are you doing with that artifact?" High Prime Vora asked, her voice trembling. "It smells of sulfur and old lubricants. Surely it cannot compare to a pulse emitter." "A pulse emitter needs a battery and a targeting computer, Vora," Caleb said, snapping a 200-round belt of 5.56mm ammunition into the feed tray with a metallic clack that echoed like a hammer on an anvil. "This thing just needs a trigger finger and a sense of direction. It doesn't ask the core mind for permission to fire." From the shadows of the maintenance bay, the clicking returned. Not just a few dozen this time, but a tidal wave. The Skitter-Wretches had realized their prey was cornered. They swarmed over the pipes and ceiling, their void black bodies absorbing the faint yellow light of Caleb's flashlight. "They are coming!" The acrylic delegate hissed, its gas form shrinking into the corner. There are hundreds! Your iron bar will not be enough. I'm done with the bar, Caleb muttered. He kicked open a heavy steel maintenance desk, sliding it across the floor to create a makeshift bipod rest. He dropped behind it, his shoulder tight against the walnut stalk. The first Skitter-Wretch lunged, its lidless eyes reflecting the faint orange glow of the Zippo Caleb had left burning on the desk. Caleb pulled the trigger. The silence of the Apex Spire didn't just break, it was annihilated. The roar of the machine gun was a physical force, a rhythmic, deafening thud-thud-thud-thud that shook the very foundation of the floor. Each muzzle flash was a miniature sun, illuminating the room in strobe-like bursts of violence. The Luminara screamed, not from the creatures, but from the sound. They had never heard a weapon that functioned through controlled explosions. To them, it was the sound of a god screaming. The 5.56mm rounds, traveling at nearly 900 meters per second, met the Skitter-Wretches. On a digital battlefield, these creatures were phasing horrors that scrambled sensors. Against kinetic lead, they were just meat. The bullets tore through their void hide, shattering their translucent bones and splashing their oily ichor across the crystalline walls. It is not stopping, Vora cried out, covering her sensory pits. How can it fire so fast without overheating? Because it's built to suffer! Caleb shouted over the roar, his teeth bared in a grimace of pure concentration. He swept the barrel in a wide arc. The tracer rounds, every fifth bullet, painted lines of fire through the dark, marking the path of destruction. The Skitter-Wretches, who had spent 10,000 years evolving to hide from light and energy, had no evolutionary answer for a supersonic piece of copper-jacketed lead. They didn't phase. They disintegrated. In 90 seconds, the bay was a graveyard of black husks. Caleb let go of the trigger, the barrel of the saw glowing a dull, angry red in the darkness. The smell of cordite, sharp, metallic, and ancient, filled the air. The silence that followed was heavier than the one before. The aliens looked at the carnage, then back at Caleb. He was covered in soot and brass casings, his chest heaving. You use explosions to throw stones, Vora whispered, her light returning in a flickering, terrified yellow. You are not a technician. You are a force of nature. I'm a human, Vora, Caleb said, his voice raspy as he reached for a fresh ammunition belt. And we've been throwing stones since we climbed out of the trees. We just got better at the throwing part. He stood up, the hot barrel hissing as a drop of condensation hit it. He looked at his mechanical watch. Stage 5 is over, Caleb said. But the void isn't just a pack of animals, it's a consciousness. It's seen what we can do now. It's going to stop sending the dogs and start sending the hunter. He pointed his flashlight toward the far end of the bay, where a massive manual pressure valve sat, the gateway to the Spire's primary broadcast array. If I can get a signal out using the old radio relay, I can tell the Terran fleet where to hit this thing. But I need you to hold the line while I work the dials. Can you do that? Or are you still waiting for the core mind to tell you how to breathe? Vora looked at the smoking machine gun, then at the blood on Caleb's hands. She stood up straight, her blue light stabilizing into a firm, defiant glow. Show me the lever, Mr. Cross, Vora said. I believe I am ready to be a barbarian. The maintenance bay smelled of ozone, spent brass, and the copper tang of blood. Caleb Cross knelt before a rusted console that looked like it belonged in a mid-20th century submarine. This was the Aegis relay, for the backup, designed to transmit raw radio waves via a physical copper antenna that stretched along the Spire's exterior. No encryption, no digital packets, just a raw, screaming signal. It is a box of knobs, High Prime Vora said, her blue light steadying as she stood guard with Caleb's iron pry bar. How can this reach the stars when the core mind's quantum burst failed? Quantum bursts are delicate, Caleb grunted, his fingers stripping the casing off 2 wires. They need a perfect bridge. A radio wave is just a ripple in the pond. It's messy, it's slow, but it doesn't give a damn if the void is hungry. It just moves. Suddenly, the air in the room grew cold. Not the environmental chill of a dead spire, but a psychic frost. The shadows in the corners of the room didn't just move. They thickened into a singular, towering mass. The distorted voice returned, but this time it didn't come from the walls. It came from the static of the radio Caleb was trying to fix. Caleb! Cross. The static hissed, forming words through pure interference. You are a flicker of heat in a cold universe. Why do you struggle for these ghosts of light? They are fragile. They are obsolete. Join the silence. The Zinthari and Krillic delegates collapsed, clutching their heads as the void consciousness projected a wave of pure existential despair into their minds. They saw the end of all things. The heat death of the universe, the meaninglessness of their achievements. Vora fell to her knees, her light fading to a dull gray. It is right. We are nothing without the network. We are just echoes. Caleb didn't fall. He didn't even stop working. He picked up a small handheld transistor radio from his bag, a piece of junk that had survived the EMP because its vacuum tubes were shielded in lead. He turned the volume to maximum. A frantic, rhythmic sound filled the room. Heavy metal. The distorted, high-decibel guitar riffs and the thunderous beat of a drum kit shattered the void's psychic silence. Caleb started humming along, a grim, jagged tune that defied the perfect harmony of the Luminara. "Listen to me, Vora," Caleb shouted over the static and the music. "It's trying to sell you a lie. It thinks the dark is its home. It thinks it invented the silence." He stood up, facing the towering shadow, the glowing red tip of his cigarette, pulled from a crushed pack, the only light in his face. "In my world," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a low, predatory growl, "we spent 100,000 years huddled in caves. We watched the stars and wondered if they'd swallow us. We lived with the things that go bump in the night until we realized something." Caleb took a long drag and exhaled smoke into the void mass. "The things in the dark? They aren't the monsters. We are. We're the ones who learned how to capture the lightning. We're the ones who learned how to split the atom just to see what was inside. You want silence? You picked the wrong species to quiet down." He jammed the two wires together. A spark jumped. Not blue or gold, but a fierce, dirty orange. "Vora, the pressure valve! Turn it clockwise, now!" Vora, shaken by Caleb's raw, terrifying defiance, grabbed the heavy iron wheel. She didn't use her internal charge. She used her weight. She used her muscles. With a scream of effort, she turned the ancient gear. The Spire groaned. Above them, the massive copper antenna, the relic, slid out of its housing, cutting through the void slime that coated the building's exterior. Caleb grabbed the radio's microphone. He didn't use a code. He didn't use a digital signature. He just broadcast on the emergency international distress frequency, the one every Terran ship, no matter how advanced, kept a passive ear on. "This is Caleb Cross, Apex Spire. The lights are out, the dogs are barking, and I've got a room full of VIPs who need a ride home. Signal is analog, 144 megahertz. Follow the smoke." The shadow mass shrieked, a sound of frustrated geometry, and lunged at him. Caleb didn't reach for the saw. He reached for his Zippo and a canister of pressurized cleaning fluid. "I told you," Caleb whispered as he flicked the lighter. "We invented fire." A 10-foot jet of flame incinerated the leading edge of the shadow. Caleb didn't retreat. He stepped into the dark, the fire breather in his hand, a human wolf in a galaxy of sheep. The makeshift flamethrower hissed its last breath of pressurized gas, the orange jet sputtering into a weak blue flicker before dying completely. The darkness of the void rushed back in, a cold, sentient tide that seemed to swallow the very heat from Caleb's skin. "The fire, it is gone," Vora whispered, her voice surprisingly calm. She stood beside Caleb, the heavy iron pry bar gripped in hands that no longer shook. She had learned the most terrifying human secret. When there is nothing left to lose, you stop being afraid and start being dangerous. "Well," Caleb grunted, dropping the empty canister. He checked his mechanical watch. The hands were still moving, the tiny gears oblivious to the cosmic horror surrounding them. "My watch says it's time for the cavalry. If I'm wrong about the Terran Navy's response time, I owe you an apology in the afterlife." "There is no afterlife for echoes," the void hissed, its mass coiling for a final strike. "Only the silence." Just as the shadow mass lunged, a new sound tore through the Spire. Not a psychic whisper or a digital chime, but a sonic boom that shattered every remaining pane of crystalline glass in the maintenance bay. A massive, blunt-nosed shape descended through the thick atmosphere outside, illuminated by the red glow of atmospheric friction. It wasn't a sleek, glowing Luminara cruiser. It was the TSS Hammerhead, a Terran search and rescue frigate. It looked like a collection of shipping containers and armor plates welded together around a massive engine. It didn't use a docking beam. It fired 4 titanium harpoons into the Spire's exterior, the cables pulling tight with a mechanical screech that drowned out the void's scream. "Did someone call for a ride?" A voice crackled over the emergency radio, thick with a heavy Terran accent. We followed the smoke and the 144 megahertz scream. Sorry for the noise, we're running on backup diesel turbines. The hammerhead opened fire. It didn't use lasers, which the void could phase through. It used 30mm rotary cannons loaded with depleted uranium rounds. The physics-based projectiles tore through the Spire's walls and the shadow mass alike, the sheer kinetic energy disrupting the void's cohesion. Inside, now! Caleb shouted, grabbing Vora and the wounded Zinzol. As they scrambled into the breach made by the Terran boarding party, men and women in heavy, sealed environmental suits carrying shotguns and mechanical torches, the darkness finally broke. The void couldn't handle the noisy reality of humanity. We were too loud, too physical, and too stubbornly real. 6 months later, the Zenith Accord. The Apex Spire had been rebuilt, but it looked different. The crystalline walls were now reinforced with steel girders, and every 50 floors there was a manual oxygen crank and a cache of analog tools. High Prime Vora stood on the observation deck, her blue light now a deep, steady sapphire. She no longer looked at the core mind as a god. She looked at it as a tool, one that needed a backup. Beside her, Caleb Cross sat in a comfortable, old-fashioned leather chair, winding his mechanical watch. He was no longer a Sub-Zero specialist. His new badge read, Chief of the Analog Protocol. The Council has ratified the new laws, Vora said, looking out at the stars. Every vessel in the Dominion, every station in the Covenant, must now carry a human specialist and a locker of zero-tech equipment. They're calling it the Cross Protocol. Funny, Caleb said, looking at the ticking watch. I just call it not being a sitting duck. They asked me why, Vora continued, turning to him. They asked why the humans were the only ones who survived the silence. I told them what you told me. And what was that? Vora smiled, a very human expression. I told them that the universe is a cold, dark place, and that while the rest of us were trying to outrun the dark, humans were the only ones who remembered to bring the matches. Caleb laughed, stood up, and adjusted his satchel. Well, High Prime, the protocol is in place. But I've got a meeting with the Zinthari Engineering Corps. They want to learn how to tie a bowline knot and how to fix a leak with duct tape. A noble pursuit, Vora agreed. As Caleb walked away, his heavy boots thudding against the floor, Vora noticed he had left something on the table. It was his vintage Zippo lighter. She picked it up, feeling the cold, heavy steel. She flicked the lid. Clink. She struck the wheel. Flick. The small orange flame danced in the center of the most advanced spire in the galaxy. Vora didn't look for a sensor to dim it. She just watched the fire, realizing for the first time that the most important piece of technology in the universe didn't need a signal. It just needed a spark.